This video is brought to you by BTI Institute, a New Jersey leader in certification-based management training.
All right, I just wanted to remind everyone that this session is being recorded, and I would like to welcome you to the final Agile Discussion Group before the summer. And tonight we have a special guest speaker, Michael James, and it's going to be a very interesting topic. We're going to talk about how is knowledge creation work different. And before we actually get into Mike's intro, I did want to point out that at the end of the meeting, we will have a special announcement after Michael's presentation, where we're going to be talking about a new, the CSM CLB class that we're going to be having at the end of September. It's 5 half-day sessions during the last week in September, and we're actually offering a special July 4th discount, and it's a pretty decent discount, and hopefully if you don't have your CSM or your CLB certification, it's an opportunity you might want to get into because it's very competitively priced and it's a really great class. We ran it last December with Michael and we got very positive feedback from all the members that attended. So with that, I'd like to introduce Michael. Michael was actually, if you look at the Scrum Guide, you could see the two co-signers and Ken Schwaber is one of them. And actually Mike was brought into as a Scrum trainer by Ken himself, who's one of the co-creators of Scrum, along with Jeff Sutherland. And Michael's been basically working with teams and helping them actually grow their Agile skills. I know he works a lot with people in Japan, which is pretty exciting. And he's actually been authored a number of books. He has a Scrum Master checklist that I've actually used with my teams. And if you've ever come to one of the Agile booths during the PMI sessions, you've seen a blue comic book that Michael has also created. So I'm not going to read the chart to you, but I just wanted to share with you that Mike has a lot of experience. And without any further updates or anything, I'd like to introduce Michael. So Michael, it's all yours.
I'm muted there. Hey, it's good to see everyone here, and those of you that I've met before, it's good to see you again. Never sure how. Sometimes it's good to cover some of the things that I've talked about in a class or something before. So that's one of the things I'm always wrestling with in these talks. You can also call me MJ. We started doing that because there are so many people named Michael in the world. It helped to disambiguate. Yeah, Bob mentioned the Japan connection. I'll tell a story about when I met the person who would become my father-in-law. Went to Japan. Now he doesn't live in Tokyo or any of the places that you're thinking about when you go to Japan. He's out in the middle of nowhere, a place called Kashihara in Nara Prefecture. So it's a semi-rural area, and when I go to have the experience of walking my children to school there, and they kind of looked at me like all the kids there look like an animal in the zoo. They just hadn't seen anyone like me in their neighborhood before. And I know enough Japanese to overhear them saying, "Is that going to be our English teacher?" But one of the reasons that I was on that trip was to meet my wife's, well, she wasn't my wife yet, to meet her father and tell him, "I'm planning to marry your daughter. How do you feel about that?" And he looked at me and says, "You? How are you going to support a family?" He's very traditional. This isn't, I mean, there's another century. So how are you going to support my daughter and your family? And I explained, well, I'm all the stuff you just heard. You know, I'm a famous Agile. People come from other countries to come to my class, translated into 24 languages. And he says, "Oh, that's not a real job. Prove to me that you can do real work." And the way it works there, the tax code is such that if you buy a piece of land and try to grow a farm on it, then you can write off the land. You can get a tax. There's all kinds of reasons. Even though he's not a farmer, he did own some farmland. And so to prove your worthiness, he put this tool in my hand, like a digging, I guess it's like shaped sort of like a hoe, I guess. And gave me the location of the land he owned and said, I want you, I know you have a week left on your trip here. I want you to go to this land and dig some rows in it. So because I'm gonna be planting in that farm there. And just use this tool. There's no trick to this. You can't hire other people or use machinery or anything like that, just with this tool. So, okay. I also don't know anything about working the land, but I went out there on Monday, and it's hot. It's hot. I mean, like Seattle yesterday was nothing compared to Japan in this summertime, this part of Japan especially. So here I am digging, but I got through it. I just kind of got into this frame of mind where I could just kind of lose track of time and do it. And so Monday, at the end of Monday, and now the mosquitoes are coming out and all the cicadas are singing, and you hear the the sounds of different bugs they're making. And I noticed that I'd gotten about optimistically 15% of the work done. So, well, it's okay. I've got some more time left. I don't have to do it all on Monday. So I went back on Tuesday. Of course, Tuesday I was sore. You can imagine, after you haven't used these muscles, maybe ever. So I'm out here digging on Tuesday. Got about the same amount of work done. And that's how the week went. Did that each day, got a little bit further, a little bit more progress. Thursday night, it was looking like I was going to get done. And so I brought him there to show him how much I'd gotten done. And of course, I've got one day left. And he said, "Where the hell are you going? This is not my land." I had gone to the wrong location to dig all these rows. I had worked so hard to do this, and now there's only one day left. And I don't know any magic trick to solve that problem. And this brings us to our topic of how is knowledge creation work different than other kinds of work? Let's say that the story I just told was not about knowledge creation work. Let's take another example. Let's say can I see do we have any programmers here? Anyone who's ever, maybe in college or once in a class sometime, you wrote code? Maybe not even, or good. Okay, we have some, at some point, one HTML counts, SQL counts, styles. Okay, good. So we got some people who have some idea about doing that. And let's say if you haven't written a computer program, substitute something else like school assignment or book report, or maybe the holiday letter you send out to your families and relatives and stuff. So take that, and let's say you've got a week to do that. On Monday, you had some ideas about it, and you typed them. You spent some time working these ideas. You thought about what to put in there, but you weren't really happy with what you had done Monday, but you got something on the page anyway. So Monday night you slept. And then middle of the night you woke up with an idea and you jotted it down and went back to sleep. So Tuesday you go in and you look at your idea and realize, wow, there's actually something here. And so you throw away half of what you did on Monday and replace it with the idea that you had in your dreams. And then you get a little further, and then you get stuck again. Ah, damn. Wednesday morning, when you're in the shower, it's a really inconvenient time, you realize, oh, wait, I just figured out the problem with the idea I had before. I've got to change that. So you can't wait to get out and go work on that some more. So on Wednesday, you incorporate the new idea. You throw away about half of what you've got thus far, replacing that with something else. And you've got some stuff working now. You're looking at it, say, okay, maybe there's a chance this is going to work by Friday. And then you got stuck again. So you called up maybe it was a mentor or someone you used to work with, maybe someone that you get just with a different way of thinking that you argue with all the time, but can sometimes knock your ideas loose. So you called up that person, discussed it with her. And then you realize, oh, okay, now I've got it. And so then you're just cooking. Got all the stuff done. Thursday, you're showing it to people, and by now you've tried 9 different things that don't work and a 10th way that you think is going to work. And it's just a matter of putting the finishing touches on it. You go to the library, you do some research, fill in some gaps, get feedback about it. So all these things are happening. Thursday night, you're feeling good about it. and sit back with a, let's say it's a Manhattan. Let's say you've got a nice cold Manhattan, if that's your thing, a couple cherries in it, and you're relaxing, thinking about this. And you notice your cat is not allowed to be on the table, jumps up on the table. And with her little paws, she manages to type git rm-rf. Pretty smart cat. And she's erased everything that you've done since Monday. So now all your files are gone. Everything that you've typed since Monday is lost now. And you're feeling bad about it. But then when you come in Friday, actually, I'm going to ask you what your opinion is. I believe that by, so depending when you start, something like 10 o'clock on Friday, you will have caught up to where you had been on Thursday night. So somehow, and actually maybe a little bit better than what you had on Thursday night. And this raises the question, what's different about this kind of work than the kind of work I described before? And specifically, what was the constraint? What was the fundamental constraint on that work? Now, in the first case, it was like the physical, the work of the digging that had to be done. There's no way to speed that up, right? Using one tool, one person, it's a fixed problem. But on the second problem, I don't think that typing was the constraint. I don't think the speed of your typing was the main constraint, because you caught up on Thursday morning and caught up with where you had been before. So what were you actually doing Monday through Thursday? What were you doing when you were, remember, you were getting ideas, you were ideating, so you were thinking, you were analyzing, you were getting empirical feedback, you were doing research. Let's just call all that stuff, you were synthesizing ideas, you go into sources where you wouldn't think of to get the ideas sometimes. So let's call that stuff learning. And I will suggest that learning is the real constraint in software development. And people have been saying this for years, but I only recently realized this. Even though working in Scrum, it mentioned, and I realized that I'm not the only person who didn't realize this. If you look at, for example, the Agile Manifesto, it says we are uncovering better ways. So what does better mean? Because better in one axis is worse in another axis. And then I look at the Scrum guide and realize, and of course I have to read the Scrum guide on a regular basis because I'm teaching Scrum. Realize that even Scrum, you can tell they're not actually sure what it's for. They're talking about better, very vague words. So better in one sense is worse in another. This leads to the central topic for when I'm working with an organization, is trying to find out what is the optimization goal. Someone says, "Oh, I want to buy a good car." We use a car analogy. Well, a good car for me when I was 19 years old is pretty different than a good car for me now that I have a family, and I don't really like. A good car for me when I was 19 was a sports car with suspension is tuned like this, and it shakes your teeth every time you go over a bump. But that's optimizing on one axis at the expense of others. And so the same thing is true about every agile adoption, I think, is that the management are not aligned on what the purpose is, what problem they're trying to solve. And so they wind up, and of course, with Scrum or any of the other methods, we have the power, in fact, we have the responsibility to change our methods and processes. So we have the responsibility to optimize. Like, for example, the sprint retrospective is an opportunity to optimize our process, our ways of working, if you want to call it that. And if we're doing, by the way, if we're doing a large-scale Scrum, there's also an overall retrospective, which is a chance to optimize the whole organization, and we do this every sprint. But if you just use the practices without a direction about what the problem is we're trying to solve, we get what usually happens, which are arbitrary results. Things look better at one level and something that looks better, and you get two different reports from the same agile adoption. This is why you have to be really skeptical about any of the case studies that are written about any agile adoption. Remember, I've been doing this almost 20 years, and anytime I hear about like a big bang transformation, um, I've seen this movie before, and I talked to people who work there, and it turns out actually the actual differences we've made to the fundamental chemistry of organization are, now we've done a lot of renaming, the great renaming, but we haven't made major changes because, and I believe part of the puzzle, part of the reason that's happening, is that we've been unclear about the optimization goal. And usually I get different levels of management have a different opinion of what we're trying to solve with this. And so we run into problems. Of course, if we're going to do a process, it could be Scrum or really any of them, that involves changing what we're doing, we're going to run into some kind of obstacle. And the obstacle is it is there for because someone had a good reason to put it there. Someone was trying to solve a problem at some point. And the goal of that problem solving, sometimes we call this a quick fix, a legitimate problem they're trying to solve, but it comes at the expense of what might be the broader goal of an agile adoption. And I will suggest that is, or could be, the one that I'm interested in nowadays anyway, is the ability to discover and deliver the highest value in a world where everything's changing and we don't know everything even in the beginning. So even if we did know everything in the beginning, the fact that the target's moving, even if we did have perfect knowledge in the beginning, the ability to learn and adapt. Okay, so you're sort of with me so far. Focus of knowledge creation work, and I'll specifically mention software development. Your job might not be software development, but suggest software is eating the world. One way or another, you're going to be touched by it, even if that's not your work. So I'm going to stick to that because that's something I know about also. The fundamental constraint in that now in software development is the learning, knowledge creation work, and organizations, even ones that are quote doing agile, aren't designed for that understanding. Now I'm going to tie this into another topic, and this will start to make sense at some point. I'm going to put up this question, and I'm going to ask you to not look at. There is actually some research, but I'm going to ask you not to Google the research. So don't cheat on this. Actually, first let's give a definition. Usually, when you think of a startup company, people, what comes to your mind? You see, like, you probably see two guys in the garage eating ramen noodles, inventing the, like Hewlett Packard, or inventing the Apple I computer, something like that. But let's suggest a startup is everywhere now. Startup is, we can use a more general definition. A startup is a business that will eat your lunch if you're not also learning and doing this similar things that they are. So we're going to use a little bit broader definition of startup, because I don't want you to switch off because you work in perhaps a big bureaucratic company or government agency or something like that. And you say, there's no startup here. But there is. And people are going to find better ways of doing the work that you're doing, whether or not you learn what they are. So you want to be the first people to learn or not. So success at that, though, it's always a high risk. And that's part of Eric Ries's definition of startup. It's a high risk endeavor where there's a lot of uncertainty, a lot of unknowns. Here's a question. Here's a place where you could just send these in over the chat here. Let's put this on everyone. So anyone who has, and I'm asking people who have not actually Googled this, because there's some interesting research about this. Anyone who hasn't Googled this, what do you think the reason might be for startups failing? Why do startups fail? So we have a few different answers. Lack of passion, undercapitalization, right? Ran out of cash. Yeah, that happens a lot. That's one that we hear about a lot. Undercapitalization, no market need, burnout, ran out of cash, unable to scale. Interesting. Yeah, we had a good model, but we couldn't scale it. A lot of things about this. And I noticed the answer to this has a lot to do with what your background has been and the kinds of failures you've seen. So the research I'm about to put on the screen, I want you to take it with a grain of salt, because I don't know. One thing that's happened is I've learned about research is that it's not nearly as unbiased as you think it is. But the reason, but it's an interesting perspective. I'm going to put the people who studied this problem. They looked at 101 startups, and in their opinion, so they did postmortem on them, in their opinion, what caused them to fail. So this is through the lenses of the people who did the research. It's just an interesting viewpoint, just an interesting opinion. But it's an interesting one to think about, useful to think about. This is the reasons that they found in their admittedly biased research. So they found no market need was the top reason, followed by ran out of cash, undercapitalization, and then some other things. The things that I would have thought are not really that high. Like I would have thought burnout, because I see that a lot. But think about, when does burnout happen? Is it because people are working too much, or other causes? Lack of, there's no vision or thing behind that. Anyway, so this is interesting. My only point in showing this is that let's consider no market need an important thing to learn about. And this has been in the message from the beginning, but I wasn't hearing it, even though I was in the Agile community. I remember being at a talk by Alistair Coburn, and we're talking about, well, should we write the code this way or should we do it that way? And why should we do this? And then the reason he gave was that you will learn more if you do it this way. It's like, what? What does that have to do with solving a business problem? Didn't get that. And then after, by the way, Alistair Coburn is one of the authors of the Agile Manifesto. Then there's another person who said something. His name is Kent Beck, who originally said, so if you remember the principles of the Agile Manifesto, or actually the values in this case, one of the values is working software over comprehensive documentation. And then Kent Beck came back a few years later and said something different. And I missed it. Actually, I didn't miss it. But let's put it on the screen here. Validated learning over working software. So what do we mean by validated learning software? Validated learning over working software. Validated learning. Let's I'm going to wander now into Eric Ries territory. Eric Ries is the author of Lean Startup. Anyone here read? So read, have it on your shelf versus read the book, or skimmed it but skipped. Actually read it. I'm just going to I'll give a little bit of a refresher, even though. Let's put the book on the screen. I do recommend read this book, even though perhaps he goes, in some aspects of it, he goes into overboard in some specific practices. But the philosophy behind this is what I want you to look at. I'm going to give an example of not a lean startup first. So not a lean startup was back in the, I guess it was the late 80s, 1980s. Imagine a world before cell phones, and people have this great vision. A satellite phone network. You can use a phone anywhere in the world. You go there in the middle of Pacific Ocean, doesn't matter. A phone that works wherever you are, like a bat phone. You always have this. And they spent, it was a consortium involving Motorola and some other companies. They spent about $5 billion on this beautiful vision, beautiful idea that made lots of sense to people. But in the meanwhile, the target moved. Life changed, and cellular phones became way more popular. And they developed digital cell phones. They had roaming networks. All this technology happened, and it turned out that most of the population lived within some number of feet of a cell phone tower, anyway. So that those billions of dollars that they spent, they went bankrupt, and they and so they spent $6 billion. I think they sold it for $100 million was the low point of that. Now, ironically, it's producing value again, but at its low, the $6 billion turned into zero, basically. So how do you make $100 million? Start with $6 billion and a good idea, and a vision. And without the validated learning loop. And that was give another example, extreme example. There was a grocery delivery service called Webvan that if you live on anyone, I don't know if it was if it affected you, but and it was a big deal on the West Coast. There was another company here. And based on what people said they would do, what people said in focus groups. So you say, okay, the mistake is, they didn't talk to the customers. They should have talked to their customers. Okay, great. Let's talk to customers and see if that solves the problem. So they did. At Webvan, they talked to customers. They talked to all these people like me, people like my wife, consumers, people like all the UW students that live in my neighborhood. Would you use the service? And they said, oh yeah, we would definitely use that service. I said, yes, great. Okay. So they spent about $1 billion, on this Webvan endeavor, and also vaporized that money because it turns out what people say they do is different than what they will actually do. This brings us to the definition of the word empirical and what do we mean by a validated learning loop. We'll give an example of what is a lean startup. An example of lean startup thinking. You're probably familiar with Zappos shoes. Now that started with a hypothesis, a value hypothesis that there will be value, people will find value in buying shoes online. Now that's a guess, and we're recognizing it. That's a hypothesis, just means guess, and we're going to recognize, okay, that's a guess. We're going to try to prove that guess or prove it wrong. Either way, what's the fastest, most accurate way to prove that guess right or wrong? Some of you know what they did. The fastest and most accurate, cheapest, most accurate way to prove that wasn't to talk to people not just that by itself. We don't say we don't talk to customers, but there's another piece missing. And that was to test their actual behavior. By the way, in the Webvan or in the Iridium, if you asked me as an engineer, what's the problem you have to solve there? Even if I'd read the Agile Manifesto and all these things, I still would have thought, well, the biggest problem is how are you going to make this work? The risks, I would have assumed the risks were in, can we build this? Can we build the grocery delivery service? Can we build the satellite phone network? But those turned out, as some of you just said, that wasn't the biggest risk. And according to people who researched that, the building wasn't the actual risk. So you see why the Zappos shoes founder, instead, what he decided to do was just take pictures of shoes that he didn't even own, put them for sale online, put them up for sale to see if people would buy them or not, just to test the waters. See, hey, are people actually going to buy these shoes? Can we do a scientific test of real buyer behavior to see if people will buy shoes that are online? And which shoes are they going to buy more often? And who's going to buy them? And what problems we face along the way? So those are all the things they had to find out. So that's what he did. So the focus was not purely on the building. It was on, I'll call this a validated learning loop. Now, of course, what happened next, some of you probably know what happened next is people did buy the shoes. It's like, oh shit, we don't own any shoes. We have to go buy them now. And they'd go buy the shoes retail, pay full price for these shoes just to ship them to people. You might think, well, that's pretty stupid business. You're paying $40 to sell someone shoes for $30. But they were doing that, losing money initially in order to learn what real buyer behavior would be. And that's a lot cheaper than the failures that we saw in order to learn what the real buyer behavior is. So let me show a picture, help you think about this. Now we're going to tie this to the topic soon, but or maybe you're already seeing the connection here. The validated learning loop, the way we're going to the way Eric Ries has described it, is we're going to build the smallest thing we can, the fastest way we can, just purely to measure what the real actual, so we want to take an empirical measurement of something meaningful, perhaps something related to the highest risk in a startup endeavor, which is there market need or not. We can measure something like that. From what we learn, that will tell us what to build next. And the tighter we can accomplish, according to Eric Ries anyway, the tighter and more accurately we can do this validated learning loop, the more of those large size risks are we mitigating with our approach. That makes sense? Or some of this is hopefully familiar to you, at least resonates at some level. Okay, that's almost intuitive, but we don't do this. So this is almost trivial. I mean, like also a lot of things, the idea of inspect and adapt or transparency and inspect, it's almost trivial. But how come we don't do it? What happens? What comes up? A lot of distractions come up. For example, so what is a real growth hypothesis versus one? So what are we supposed to measure? We tend to measure things that are not meaningful. And so are we learning, if we're going to develop a learning organization, is it developed to learn the things that are vital to its success or its longevity as a business? So this has implications, I believe, for your whole organizational design, which we're going to get to, because I see that clock ticking. But stuff to watch out for. This is definitely in the West Coast. This is a problem. These California companies, you get kind of this rah-rah thing happening where everyone, you have to, it's almost a job requirement to buy into the mission of the company. And this causes blind spots, horrible blind spots. That we saw this during the .com, and I suspect we'll be seeing more of this kind of thing as well, just having lived through a couple market failures. All right, I hope that made some sense. So I also use the sense, so I use this jargon, value hypothesis, just means, what are people going to do? Measure real buyer behavior. What's our guess? How we can grow the business. Do we have a theory about it? We want to test that theory rather than believe it. Just do it purely on faith. Yeah, trust but verify. And that's what Alistair Coburn was telling me years and years ago that I didn't hear him say. And this is what Kent Beck also said. That's what he means by validated learning over working software. Of course, working software over comprehensive documentation. And the only way to get to, assuming we're talking about a software product, the only way to get validated learning is to build a real product. But in the service of what? In the service of discovering and delivering the highest value in a world where we don't know everything in the beginning and everything is changing. That makes sense so far? Now let's talk about my daughter just went to piano lesson today. Any other people, musicians, you might see I've got an accordion up on the mantle here. Anyone else, which is arguably a musical instrument? You can't see it, but it's really there. The joke about the guy who left the accordion in his car and the car was unlocked, and then he came back next day and there were 2 accordions. So let's talk about learning to play a musical instrument. Let's say we've constructed, you got this for really cheap, this piano. It's the most beautiful sounding piano in the world. And it just has one defect, but you can live with that, right? The defect is that it takes 24 hours before it makes a sound that you play. So you play something beautifully, but you're not going to hear it for another 24 hours. Are you going to learn piano on that? Are you going to be able to? No, because the feedback loop is just too long. And this is the way most organizations are designed. So let's come to now the organizational design implications of what we're saying here. And there's a video, class videos. Where is it? We made 2 versions of this video. One with a male voice and one with a female voice. Let's use this here. Sharing the screen. And let's see. So, how are great products created? Now, those of you that have been in this situation where we're developing a product directly hand in hand with the customer, end user, the person who's going to make a decision whether to buy it or not, or use it. And we're giving them maybe every few minutes, because that's technically possible, at least every hour, at least every day, we're giving them a new version of the product, and we're working directly with each other face to face. How are you doing this during COVID? It's another question. And so that's the reason that people discovered there was something there about Agile or Scrum. That's what they discovered, that things worked well when they did this. And why have we nearly always been unsuccessful in scaling it, to a big company? What we have here, typical big company, right? We have handoffs. So each time, now when you start thinking about, for example, large-scale Scrum, or systems thinking in general, you start to see queues everywhere. And you start to notice how they work. Like you notice how the queue at the bank is one way versus the queue at the grocery store. And you see how they're optimized for different things. You also notice something about the queue at the grocery store is that you might be the first person, or you might be there before someone else, but someone else might get served before you because of the way those queues work versus the way they work at the bank. So you just notice queues everywhere. So this is what I see when I look at your company. Is I see handoffs. I see all these things. Now we might say we're learning and we might be going through the motions of doing Scrum or doing daily stand-ups and all kinds of stuff like that. But we're not connected to the thing that actually matters. So this is actually worse than a delay piano. We have this business as very little real information in order that can cause it to improve, inspect, and adapt and tune its behavior to what the market actually needs. It has very little of that. And I think part of the reason we've been oblivious to this is that we haven't been clear about what the lean startup ideas, actually, about the validated learning loop. This really needs to be an end-to-end connection with real users and customers. And so that's one aspect, that's one thing that would be different about a knowledge creation organization. Was one way or another we would have the ability to talk to real customers, the people doing the work, the Gemba of value creation, being close to the Gemba of value consumption. That's one aspect of it. Can we get this closer to the work as done? Now, if you're aware of some of the concepts in scaling that we talk about in large-scale Scrum, you may recognize the concept of a feature team versus a component team. So this is another thing that's different. Let's be really clear. I was just working with a place. We'll use this picture. I assume you don't want the Japanese one here. I was just working with a place that doing Scrum, and they had all these product owners. Actually, no, we can't move. Sorry, we can't. We need to address one misconception right off the bat. So, well, I'm glad this isn't being recorded. Let's come back to this. There's a way that remembering, call this Larman's first law, is that organizations are optimized for first level and middle managers not changing what they're doing. So no matter what we do, any change initiative will be revert to just a renaming of what we already have before, just using agile words for it. So in other words, we're going to make these people in these cubicles do Scrum or work a little better, but we're actually not going to solve any of the real problems. And that's why we've got this ostrich here, unaware of the real customer needs, the vital work that causes another concept we have to get to is forward-looking motivation, and there's toward-looking motivation. So there's a great book I'm going to recommend to you, David Rock. Here, in this situation, we have a forward-looking, so we have a towards kind of motivation. Let's just call that we're motivated by love here, to put it in simple terms. We're motivated by love, by empathy with the customer, empathy with each other, on the team and the customer. And that's where our motivation is coming from. Where's our motivation coming from in this picture? Wait, back up. Are all these... Here we go. Here, where's our motivation coming from here? And those of you that are working in a place like this, maybe you're this guy, maybe you're this guy, any of these people, principal motivation here is fear, or at some level, something we could put, maybe not, but something in the category if we were to classify motivations into buckets. And we're definitely not going to be a knowledge. I mean, we're going to create knowledge, but not the knowledge that's essential for the business's success. So we're not going to be what you want from a knowledge creation organization. All right, so now we need to move to that has to be explained before we get to this concept of the structure of a knowledge creating organization. It's going to involve a lot of simplification. Talk about teams a bit. So we know already, you're already aware of the myth of the lone genius. We need teams. Where's our picture of that? So, yeah, this myth of the lone genius. So if you thought that an innovative company or the company of the future of the 21st century would be succeeding by hiring Einsteins and putting them in a room alone to work, it turns out that that's a mental trap that we've gotten into. We're not going to succeed without collaboration. Now in Scrum, we're trying to make that collaboration into a real-time thing, which is why we've got to talk about what do teams actually mean? What do we mean by teams? Maybe we should look at the first Scrum paper here. And I don't mean the Scrum Guide or even Ken Schwaber's first book. I mean the Nonaka Takeuchi paper that inspired the whole thing. Now, by the way, Ken Schwaber used to kind of stop saying this, but he used to say Scrum was never invented. No one invented Scrum. It's something that they discovered. So there's no inventor of Scrum. It's something that it's some ways of working that they stumbled on. Of course, they existed for a long time before then. But we noticed, and so in the original paper, by the way, the new product development game by Nonaka Takeuchi. If you write to me, if you're interested in any of these links where these things are, I'll send you them and you can go back to the original sources. But here's what we're emphasizing here. Multidisciplinary team whose members work together from start to finish. Now, why is that going to be? What's going to cause that? Because that's where we have our breakthroughs, when different schools of thought intersect. There's a story about how they discovered or how they proved this, the existence of the Big Bang. People that were theorizing, turning the clock backwards, saying, hey, the universe is expanding. We're talking to technicians of a radio telescope. And they said, we have this theory that something should have happened, but it should have made all this noise that we hear back then. And the people running the radio telescope said, well, that's interesting because our radio telescopes keep picking up all this static that we can't explain. They actually thought it was bird droppings. They got there and scraped got in there trying to solve. Why do we keep getting all this noise when we try to take pictures of stars? So it was when those groups talked to each other, all of a sudden they realized, oh, this is the evidence for the Big Bang. That's what that is. So the multidisciplinary approach means means the end of departments. If you're serious about things that seem like a good idea in the 20th century, when the focus was productivity, the focus was just making stuff. See if I can visual what goes with that. Focusing just on productivity, which was good for the 20th century, isn't going to be what helps us succeed in the 21st century. How do we become a knowledge creation organization? And I submit that it has to do ultimately with the structure and policies of your organization. So let's talk about simplifying these structures. So talk about teams. One of the books I'll recommend. And in the class, of course, we go deeper into some of these concepts. So what's a real team? According to Dr. Richard Hackman, who has the best team research that I've found, well, the team is going to be, what most companies do is they create phony teams. A phony team is temporary endeavor. And this comes down to the concept of a project being a short-term, you can all define project better than I can, right? A specific objective within a fixed amount of time so we can start another project. But if we apply this to knowledge creation work or to software, we're going to wind up with certainly a risk of short-term teams that are not together long enough. And this is the last point here. Membership stability over a period of time is given. Or we might have some people are called a team because management declared they were a team, but they didn't form together. They didn't solve a problem together. no clarity about who's on the team, who's not. So let's get away from phony teams, but also let's look at the single function teams, and we should really question this. This was justified at some point, having a different team to do coding, then testing, then integration, having a different team doing our product management. You know, in big companies like the place I was working with for a few years, we had a dedicated department just doing UX and handing off these beautiful, this is the delay piano again, I hope you're seeing this, these beautiful specs, pixel perfect, handing them off, say, how could we possibly fail with this? Right, without realizing the importance of the validated learning loop. All these things are separate what I'll call single function teams. And so by definition, a single function team is not a Scrum team. It's not cross-functional, because that's part of the definition we just looked at, multidisciplinary team whose members work together from start to finish. Instead, what we have are handoffs. So part of untying this knot is finding ways to eliminate these handoffs, creating an end-to-end validated learning loop. What else does it imply to our structure? Well, sometimes we do have, like, we combine some disciplines together, some functions together, and we wind up with what we think, we have the illusion of a cross-functional team, but still they can only deliver inventory. In other words, still we're in this work where we can hand something off to someone else and we don't have an end-to-end customer-centric validated learning loop. Alternative to that is a feature team, which we'll go into more depth about that, a mix of different things. Now there's one, so where I wanted to open it up for questions. There was one other controversial point I wanted to make here. And did I put it in your picture here? Oh, an organized person would have done that. That is things that are intentionally not in Scrum. Because this turned into my most recent thing that was popular. You mentioned the comic book, by the way, is online, and you can get that. That was a huge hit on LinkedIn that went viral. It was written really just for trainers and coaches, but resonated with everyone. But there's also a lot of things that people think are in Scrum that are not part of Scrum. So there's no daily status meeting in Scrum. Velocity story points, these aren't part of Scrum. Scrum of Scrums isn't. Got a whole bunch of alternatives how multiple teams can work together in more fluid ways than this. Definitely like having fake product owners. That would be a way to take this situation and pretend to do Scrum without changing anything. If each of these things is called a product, then we've just defeated the purpose of validating.
What? What do you want? You want to walk with mommy? Yeah.
If you could put yourself on mute, getting some distractions. And hey, that happened at work as well.
Michael,
Anyway,
I'm going to mute everybody, so you have to unmute yourself.
Oh,
okay?
is this going to open it up for questions? So it's 8 different points here I wanted to cover, didn't get to, but I did promise that we could open this up a bit to what all y'all think about this. Oh, did I put this picture, things that aren't in Scrum, on the screen? So this was the most controversial thing I wrote, and this is all, you can read this here, it's all completely supported by the article. These things you thought were part of Scrum aren't part of Scrum, for good reasons, usually. All right. Should we do a general discussion? We can. Now everyone got muted, but you'll need to, like you to unmute.
So Nitin, maybe if there's anything in the chat, you could start the discussion with.
Nothing in the chat is yet, but I could always start off with a general question.
Did you want more about the structure? Because that's one of the things I was going to cover a little that I didn't.
Sure, we can give you some time. We also had a few initial slides that took away some time from you, MJ. So you can go ahead.
Yeah. Why don't I, let me put the structure here. So 7 alternatives. This is also, I know that you're interested in this because a huge amount of web traffic looking for this article. So I'm going to put it on the screen here. So what to do instead? So as you may know, Ken Schwaber identified the problems with Scrum of Scrums back in his second book. So it's all the way back in 2004, Scrum of Scrums was identified as a problematic approach. So what can we do instead? Well, let's suggest that if we want the validated learning loop, we want a knowledge creating organization, the learning about the important things. The role of the Scrum Master is not to enforce boundaries between teams, but to dissolve them, to create more cross-team collaboration. And that suggests that there's not as many products as you thought there are. There's really just one product. Even if there are multiple teams, there's really only one product owner and one product backlog. And now that means product owner is no longer a requirements engineer. Product owner is a source of vision and direction. It must delegate work to truly cross-functional teams. For example, teams with business analysis expertise, teams with UI design. And then we have a whole bunch of other patterns that we can use across those teams. So this will be in the follow-up. I'll send you a list of the specific practices we can use. All right. By now we have some specific things I can go more into if you like. So we send out an email regarding the links that we had. So I put up about 20 different references here. Happy to send those, put those into a follow-up mail if you like. Yeah, I don't know the interests of the particular group. I know this is the PMI, but I know that some people here are not specifically project managers. Some people are just interested in how organizations are run in general, or changing organizations. If you're coming to an Agile talk.
So we had one thing in the chat, MJ. I can allude to. It's a big question. The last piece that you had, what was not a part of Scrum?
Yeah, let's go
seems to be
there.
Interesting. And how can Scrum work in reality? I still believe there's still a lot of misconceptions, and the Scrum Guide certainly evolves. And sometimes I reread it and I find Zen moments, and then there are matters of interpretation as well. But this is certainly very interesting for some people.
Yeah. So how can it work in reality? Let's give an I was going to give one example. I just want you to know that it exists. And unfortunately, everything that's written about this is in Japanese. But currently, this is about 150 people in this organization, this company called GrooveX. There is no management role, there's no management title in this company. It's built on from the ground up as self-managing, self-organizing teams, and they're developing this, and they've developed this consumer robot, which is innovative, and so they're successful at innovation. Will it succeed in the market is another question, but that's there's one product owner, and that's the CEO, and based from there, it's based on self-managing teams, and they're doing large-scale Scrum, or what we call LESS, which is an approach that has an optional role for managers. So management is optional in large-scale Scrum. It does have a role for them, but you can do it. Has been done without a management role. So it does exist. I wanted the specifics about how are, of course, a huge topic. But I will suggest, so there's a question about these things that aren't in Scrum. And you can get to the article with this link here, or things Ken Schwaber intentionally omits from Scrum. Some of these were removed, like burn down charts used to be part of Scrum, but they're removed. Sprint tasks used to be there, but they're removed. Let's suggest that most of this is about simplification. Our focus, and this, I think the bottom line is, we want to create simpler organizations with less organizational complexity, meaning less structure, less boundaries, more without we still need clear vision, clear direction. At least I don't know how to do it without that, without for example, product owner. And the more we have of that, the more the other stuff tends to work itself out through the magic of self-organization, if we can, and cross-functionality, if we can create that.
Right, story points are always interesting. I have been working with a team that underwent 7 sprints without any story points. So
Okay.
no Fibonacci thing. He's like, well, what are you doing there? I said, well, we have other metrics we could use. Well, like what? Well, there's throughput. There's, just a count. How many pieces of work did you get done? We're not looking at the complexity. Wait, no, we just have one number. Okay. And how long did it take you?
So I will suggest, if a team is looking for an incremental way to move, if they find that that's causing a lot of angst, try just, you could have small, medium, large, or extra large, and then eventually, I don't know what my large card is, but eventually eliminate the medium card and just say either it's small or it's not. If it's not small, we can't work on it yet. We have to refine it together. Teams, cross-functional teams and product owners refine the backlog together so that so we can eventually have items that are ready for a sprint. I will give 4 potentially useful indicators that things are going well. And I'll show an example of a team that does that. So 4 potentially useful indicators that our processes and methods are working well. This actually relates to Lance's question here about quality. And so a real life example from a real company, because we did promise some reality in this program here. Here it is. Okay. So 4 potentially useful indicators. One of them would be the how happy are the customers? So customer satisfaction. Another useful indicator. Now that's hard to measure, and of course you'll get a lot of noise when you try to measure it, but it's a useful thing to optimize for anyway. Now another indicator, usually interestingly closely tied with that. How happy are the people doing the work? In one of our early large-scale Scrum adoptions, we actually used the survey as a method, one of the indicators. How happy are the people, the workers, with this? And in one case, we had, out of 200 people, only one person said it was better before. That was pretty cool, yeah. And then, so customer satisfaction, employee satisfaction, defect rate. Let's look at your defect rate. How many bugs are there in your product? How often are you releasing bugs? And then, of course, one way to release no bugs is to never ship. So we'll take a 4th one, which would be the frequency of release. How often can you release a product? I'm going to show you a team, but this is called Hunter Industries. It's in San Diego, California. And because they understand that software development is knowledge creation work, they have happy customers, delighted people actually move there to work for this. And I think you can visit them. They used to take visitors pre-COVID anyway to see them working. They have 0 defects, nearly 0 defects. Now there's a sign on the wall saying 13 weeks since the last time we released a bug in our production. So it's very unusual to have a bug, release a defect, for a bug to escape the team room. Of course, they're doing test-driven development, all the modern practices you'd expect. And then they're also releasing multiple times per day. And that is what they're doing is something you are willing to do. They're doing mob programming. That means they're all, maybe you've heard of this already. It means, by the way, they spend the first hour of their day learning new skills. They want to have the sharpest tools in the business. It doesn't look efficient, but in the long run, it's way more practical. Because those bugs are the real cost. Right? Those bugs are the real thing that slow you down, those interruptions. So spend the first hour just learning new skills. And the way they work, they don't need a daily scrum. A scrum trainer told you not to do a daily scrum. Because they're going to work together all day anyway. They're going to work on one thing. Their whip limit is 1. There's no cues, no handoffs here. They're working on one thing at a time together. And the way they're doing it's kind of interesting. You can watch this video on your own and see it. But they alternate. Every 15 minutes, a different person is driving. So you see the driver switches, and everyone else is navigating. So as a driver, I'm only typing code that's suggested by a navigator. And if you watch this video, you see that by 10 o'clock, Oh, we promised to say something about the role of management, and we didn't. So by 10 o'clock, they've released their first feature that they got. I have done. Nowadays, they would have deployed it live. The role of management turns out to be the role of a Scrum Master, in particular in this case, anyway, the manager or coach. Main thing is actively doing nothing. That is the hardest thing. Where does it say that? Anyway, it's in this video. You can watch it on your own. That is the hardest thing about being a Scrum Master, the actively doing nothing part of it. We have other tools in our toolbox, but if we're doing stuff right, it's like flying a helicopter. You barely move the controls. You barely see that it's happening. Didn't have as many questions. I didn't offend enough people, or...
All right, well, it's a quiet audience tonight, Michael.
How to transition. Okay, there is... Okay, I have something on that. I'll just suggest their key adoption principles, at least for less or large-scale Scrum: top-down and bottom-up engagement, use volunteering, and there are specific tools such as a feature team adoption map that we use to move gradually from what we had to this hypothetical ideal of the role of feature teams. So there's an answer to that, the best I can give in 10 seconds.
All right, we're at the top of the hour. So Michael, I'd like to thank you for sharing the information and sharing this presentation tonight. And I'm sure as people think about it, they're going to come up with more questions. And I think they will appreciate anything that you can send. So with that, I will share my screen. Pretty much, this is the book that I mentioned that we were giving out during when we used to have live sessions. That's the comic book. That's actually very helpful. I've still been using that. I've been handing it out to people, and people really do appreciate it. And there's actually an online PDF version of it. And if you want to reach out to Michael, you would send an email to mj@seattlescrum.com. And at the beginning of the message, the code that you'll get for claiming your PDUs is this, and it will come up in the survey that John will be sending. And I think, John, you had